Hi friends, this is Dr. Higgins, and this video I'm hoping to cover some tips that I have for helping students get prepared and plan for having a super successful semester of studying. Um, Engineering school is definitely hard. The course content itself is hard, but I think one of the skills that somewhat makes it more hard is time management, especially for students who did really well in high school and who maybe didn't have to um, devote as many hours to studying um, as will be expected of you in engineering school. Um, so, with that said, I want to show you how um, basically I kind of managed my time or thought about managing time as an undergraduate student in engineering, um, and really just walk you through the process that I recommend to prepare for a really good semester. And most of this has to do with scheduling your time, not just time that you're going to be in class, although that's really important, but also for when you are going to devote study hours to each course. Um, so I'm going to run this as somewhat of a like like a workshop. So what I'm hoping is that you can work through your own schedule as I go through an example schedule. I actually have an undergraduate student who's taking what I would consider a typical course load right now. I had them share with me their schedule for this upcoming semester, so that I can show you how I would go from just having a schedule at the start of the semester to plotting out how I'm going to spend my study hours. So hopefully, what you can do is follow along with me. Pause the video whenever you need to fill out the information as we go. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. The very first thing that you're going to want to do is potentially, why can I not open? There we go. Open a Word document. And in this Word document, you're going to collect some critical information about all of your courses. So the very first thing that you want to list is just the courses that you're taking. So for instance, this particular student is taking I think mechanical systems two. And so you should have a list of course names. So you'll have course one, course two, course three, course four. And then for each of these courses, there's a set of critical information that I need you to go hunt down before we can really go through this planning process. So the very first thing that you need to know is when is that course meeting? So when are the meeting times? And you might, for instance, have lecture meeting times as well as lab meeting times. And sometimes professors call labs different things, so it could be like a workshop time or something like that. Um, List all of the meeting times that you're going to be expected to be there in person or attend at a particular time. You'll need to list the locations as well for each of those meetings. So you might have a lecture that happens in a lecture hall, and then maybe a lab that happens in who knows, maybe a wet lab on main campus or something like that. So list all of the locations. You'll also want to list the credit hours for that course. So a typical number of credit hours is 3. Some courses are a little bit different and might have 4, some might have 2. But you need to know the number of credit hours for this exercise. And then lastly, I want you also to collect the office hours for your course. And there might be multiple sets of office hours that are available. So this might be like your instructor's office hours. So maybe this is like Dr. Kim's office hours, who is the instructor for the course. Maybe they meet or they have office hours Monday, Wednesday, 11 to 12, something like that. And then there might be a TA. So maybe it's like TA Alex has office hours Tuesday, Thursday from 1 to 2. Okay. You might also consider putting the locations of those office hours. So you might put Dr. Kim's office number and wherever you're supposed to find TA Alex. That would also be a good piece of information, but I am not going to work through that for this particular example, mostly because many of the instructors for the courses that my student is taking this semester, they have not released the full syllabus yet, or they're still determining their office hours, so I don't actually have those office hours available for this example. But you supposedly will. Okay, so right now would be a great time for you to pause the video, list all of your courses, find the meeting times, locations, credit hours, office hours, and then unpause the video. So one thing I'll say before you pause is that you might need to look in a couple of different locations to find this information. So for instance, things like meeting times and locations, you should probably have that in the database or the software that you actually use to register for your schedule this semester. So for instance, I know it's different for faculty and students, but I'm able to go into like my FSU portal and do a course search, although I don't have enrollment. So wherever you enrolled, go back and find the schedule that you created, and you can find those meeting times and locations. The credit hours should also be listed there. However, the office hours are probably only going to be in the syllabus for that course or on the Canvas page for this course, for each of your courses. So you might have to go look in a couple of different locations, but right now I want you to go find all of this information for each of the courses that you've enrolled in for this semester. Go. Okay, if you're coming back, I'm going to pull up now what I have filled out for my example course schedule. So this individual is taking 4 courses. 2 of them are 3 credit hour courses, 2 of them are 4 credit hour courses, and I have them all of this information filled out, all of the meeting times, all of the office hours that are currently available, and the locations of those meeting times. Let's see. Yep. So I have all this information filled out. And now we want to start building our day-to-day and hour-to-hour schedule for the semester. And there are a couple of ways that you can do this. My preferred way, specifically for FSU uses Outlook calendars. And that is perfectly good. You can use your Outlook calendar to create your course schedule. If for whatever reason you do not like Outlook, I know I did not as an undergraduate student. For whatever reason, I always created my schedules in some like widget online. So I found a good one that you can use called Coursicle. It's the College Schedule Maker, and I believe it has all of the utilities that you're going to need to follow along with this example. So for example, you can create multiple schedules, and we're going to do that today. We're going to create one schedule for your classes and study hours, and a separate schedule for your office hours that are available. And the reason I do that is because I want there to be a schedule that you expect to hold yourself to every single week versus a schedule that includes all of the potential office hours that you could be going to, so that if any point in the semester you say, I really need some extra help with this particular course, you can go to your office hours schedule and just immediately see when are all of the office hours available to me for this course. Additionally, however, you might want to study or schedule some of your study periods, and I'll explain more what I mean by that, but you might want to schedule some of your study periods for certain courses at the same time as there are office hours available, so that either you can be working on homework during that study hour, and if you have any issues, you can, at that exact same time, you can go over to office hours and ask for help. Or if it's a course that offers like a workshop or a recitation session instead of like office hours. It's a little bit different flavor. I feel like at a recitation session, you can kind of expect that there's probably going to be someone there with more like content that they want to give you. So maybe you use the recitation hour as part of your study period. And again, I'm going to explain more of what I mean by a study period as we go through this. So the very first thing that I want you to add to your calendar are all of your course meeting times. So if we go back to our list of information here, I want you to add meeting times, both lecture and workshops, to your calendar. And every time you add these events, I want to make sure that within that event, you list the location that is taking place. So if it's a lecture, then somewhere in like the extra information for that event, I want you to include that lecture is happening at COE B135. Okay. I found this extremely helpful, especially in those first couple of weeks, to have a very easy single glance at where the heck I'm supposed to be at each hour of the day. All right. So I will do this. Let's see. I'm actually going to see if I can create. Let's create a new. If I can create a new calendar for myself. Add personal calendars? No. Create blank calendar. Okay, let's do spring 2026 course study schedule. I'll create a completely new schedule. Not sure exactly what that means. We'll add it to my calendars and we'll save. Okay, so I believe what this is going to do is I can hide my actual calendar, and now we have a blank calendar that we can work with. Okay, so let's go back to this course schedule. I've got thermal fluids Monday. The first thing I need to add is Monday, Wednesday, 9:30 to 10:45. So Monday. And the other thing that you want to do is also know what are the start and end dates of the semester, and also what are the holidays for the semester. Sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but you can Google your academic calendar. You probably already know this. Academic calendar, spring 2026. So for instance, this semester term begins January 7 and term ends May 1. And the reason I want to know that is because when I go to add this first event on Wednesday, January 7, yes, Wednesday, January 7, 9:30, 10:45. 9:30, 10:45. This is EML 3016 thermal fluids 2 heat transfer. When I go to more options and when I hit make recurring, I want this event to recur every Wednesday until the end of term. And I already forgot what end of term is. May 1. Okay, so let's go to May 1. So every Wednesday until May 1. So I start at 1/7, go to May 1. I'm going to do these same start and end dates for every thing that I add to this calendar, because that's the start and end dates of the semester. And then in the add room or location, I want to make sure that I put that lecture is happening COE B135. Okay, and this is in person. If you wanted to add a description, you could, but you don't really need to. And actually, I just realized that I did not do this recursion correctly, because this lecture not only happens on Wednesdays, it also happens on Mondays. So now by clicking the Monday, it will be every Monday, Wednesday until May 1. Okay, so that is the very first thing that I've added. So that is the lecture periods. Now I need to add the workshop periods that are on Fridays, 8:15. Let's go up here, 8:15 to 10:50. And this is EML 3016 thermal fluids 2 heat transfer. And these workshops happen in COE B135. So let's go more options. COE B135. Great, make recurring. This needs to be every Friday until May 1. And this only happens on Fridays. And you know what? I just changed my mind. I actually do want to add one thing to this description, which is that I want to denote the difference between the lecture and the workshops. So I'm going to specifically label this one as workshop, whereas the other one was lecture. Okay, so that's workshop. I'm going to do edit this in all following events, and this is lecture. Okay. Let's just check that that does well in the following week, and it does. Okay, so that is the very first course. And I want you to go ahead and go through all of the courses and add all of the meeting times for all of your courses. That's the next step. So do what we just did for thermal fluids. Do that for all of the courses on your schedule. So just add the meeting times and meeting locations. So now would be another good time to pause the video and go do that. Okay, so hopefully you paused the video and went in and added all of the rest of the meeting times for your courses for the semester. So all of the lectures, all of the workshops, all of the labs that you're going to be expected to attend in person. Now would also be a good time to add to this calendar any other recurring meetings that you're going to be expected to go to. So for instance, if you're in a club and the club meets every Tuesday from 3 to 5, okay, you would want to put that in your calendar now as well. So basically we want to make it so that it is completely super easy for us to look at this calendar at any point during the semester and know exactly where we are supposed to be at any given time of the day. Next thing that we're going to want to add are study sections, so study hours for each class. So that's where we need to understand one critical piece of information about what are the number of hours you should be expecting to study per credit hour of a course. And a good rule of thumb is that you should be studying outside of class time for 2 to 3 hours per week per credit hour of the course. So let's look at the number of credit hours per course in this schedule, and let's go in and block out time in our calendar to sit down and study for that course for the expected number of hours per credit hour. The other thing that I want to add is that there is significant research to show that the spacing between when you first hear the material versus when you start to review it for the first time, that time gap has been actually really well studied in terms of what time gap results in optimal learning. And it turns out that roughly a 24-hour gap from first exposure to that first study period is ideal for learning. So 24 hours gives your brain enough time to try to digest that information, incorporate it into short, long-term memories, but also actually start to forget some key pieces of information. So that's important because when you see the material again, you then re-pick up those pieces of information that have already been forgotten. And every time you relearn a piece of material, the longer it sticks in your brain. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go course by course and try to add the appropriate number of study hours in my weekly schedule. And I'm going to try to schedule at least one of those study sessions to occur 24 hours after each course session. Okay, so let's go look at EML 3016, so thermal fluids. That's a 3 credit hour course, so I need to be studying somewhere between 6 and 9 hours per week for that specific course. So it's kind of up to you whether you choose to go ahead and schedule to do 2 hours per credit hour or 3 hours per credit hour based on what you know about yourself. I'm probably going to schedule in 2 hours per credit hour, so I'm going to try to find 6 hours per week to study for EML 3016. Okay, so here is the first time I'm going to see EML 3016 in the week. It looks like 24 hours after that, I'm actually in another class. But I have this nice gap right after that class where I have maybe an hour and a half that I could be making good use of my time. So why don't we put in EML 3016 thermal fluids 2 study session. And I'll do 11 to maybe 12:15. And I'm doing that so that I have 15 minutes to pack up and go on to that next class. So 11 to 12:15. Uh-oh, it doesn't want to give me 12:15. 11 to 12:15 p.m. Okay, and we will make this a recurring meeting every Tuesday until May 1st. Save, and I'm going to mark this as study session. And it really doesn't need a location because you can study absolutely anywhere that you would like. Okay, so that is 1 hour per week. So now I need to go find quite a few other hours to study for EML 3016. Another good rule of thumb is to try to add in time to study for a class directly before you go to class. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times courses will, they will give you reading to do beforehand, or they will give you a small lecture preparation assignment or something like that. So really the best time to prepare and get your mind ready for the information that you're about to hear is right before that class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this period 8 to 9:15 on Mondays. For another study session. So EML 3016 thermal fluids 2 study session. We'll make this recurring every Monday until May 1st. Okay. All right. Now I've got 2.5 hours set for this class. So I need to find basically 4 more. So I believe this class meets again on Wednesday. So I'm going to do the same pattern. I'm going to put a block right before that class and a block roughly 24 hours later. So why don't we actually even use this description section to set the intention for this study session? And by intention, I mean during this block of time, I will be preparing for the class directly afterwards. I will be reading the textbook material that we are about to cover, and we'll be taking notes on any questions that I want to ask or marking where I get confused. Okay, so I'm not just saying I'm going to sit there and study, because what does that mean? I'm actually going to say exactly how I'm going to be studying during this block of time. And in fact, I need to copy and paste this exact same intention for this block over here on Monday. So let's add that. And then let's go back and add the intention for the one that comes directly after our Monday class. This is a study session, but in the study session, I am specifically going to be, in this time, I'm going to be reviewing the material from yesterday's class. I will be maybe you can be rewriting your notes. I will be rewriting or polishing my notes from the day before, marking areas that I am still not entirely sure about, and potentially writing down questions that I want to ask next class or in office hours. Okay, so that's going to be review. Let's do the same thing for roughly 24 hours after our Wednesday class. And you know what? I'm going to make this easy. I'm actually going to edit this event. And instead of making it only on Tuesdays, I'm going to mark it as Tuesday, Thursday. Okay, so now I've got 5 hours of studying outside of class. I've got an hour 15, that's 2.5. Another 2.5 is 5 hours. I need to get 1 more hour of time in for EML 3016. So you'll notice that I haven't even talked about doing homework yet. So let's find another 1 hour period to be doing homework for this class. So maybe we can add it right after the Friday lab, because who knows, maybe the Friday lab will give more content that's within the homework that we need to be working on. So let's do here EML 3016 thermal fluids 2 study session. And let's do study session. This time is particularly blocked for working on homework and assignments for this course, or it can be for preparing for upcoming assessments, so quizzes or tests in this class. Make this recurring every Friday until May 1st. Save. Okay, we have now blocked out the appropriate number of hours of studying for this one course. Okay, so that puts us at 5 different study sessions. So you'll notice that I chose roughly 1 hour blocks of time for your study sessions. That is absolutely a personal preference, and it also probably depends on the course that you're doing. So for instance, if the course does not really rely on reading ahead of time, maybe you shorten this block of time that happens directly before class periods. But maybe the homeworks are particularly extensive, and so instead of being a 1 hour homework block, maybe you make it a 2 or a 3 hour homework block, or maybe you have multiple homework blocks spread throughout the week. I tend to like to break up my time into 1 hour blocks, but I do remember that for particular classes that had really hefty homeworks, especially in graduate school, I like to have a very large block of time to really dive in very deeply on each homework assignment. So maybe if that's the type of class that you're in, instead of having a 1 hour homework block or 3 1 hour homework blocks, maybe you have a homework block that's 3 hours long and you actually plan to sit and work very deeply for a significant chunk of time. So these are all personal preferences. The guideline, though, is that you should try to be getting in 6 hours, 2 to 3 hours of study time per credit hour of the course. So now what you need to do, now that you've seen this done for one single class, you need to go and do it for all of the other classes in your schedule. So next for the schedule, I'm going to work on applied linear algebra. Okay, this is a 4 credit hour class. So if I'm doing 2 hours of studying per credit, I need to find 8 hours of study time for this one class. Okay, so here is another good time for you to pause the video. Do this for yourself. Add in all of your study sessions, and then unpause the video. So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. I'm going to add in all of the study sessions, and then we'll come back together and see what that schedule looks like. Okay, hopefully you've just unpaused the video after adding all of your study sessions for all of your courses. So that's exactly what I've done here. I also found while I was working on this an interesting little feature that you might like. You'll notice that I have 2 different colors for my events. I've left all of my in-person classes as green, and I actually changed all of the colors for all of my study sessions to purple. And I did that by within my event creation, I went to categorize and I assigned these as the purple category. And that was it. And then I hit save. And this makes it even easier for me to tell whether the block that I'm looking at next is something where I need to be in a particular location at a particular time because I'm expected in class, or whether I need to just go find a seat somewhere in the College of Engineering building and sit down and study for a particular class or prepare for a particular class. Okay. One thing to note here is obviously this is an extremely full schedule. Okay. So one thing I tried to do is I tried to keep everything within the normal business hours of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. But you'll notice that I failed to some degree. But the way that I failed, I did this very intentionally, is that I added study sessions on the days and the times where I was already going to be out kind of late. So for example, I needed to be in class for linear algebra at this, what is probably an awful hour to be in class looking at linear algebra, honestly, from like 6:30 to 7:30. So I'm going to consider myself as still being on and present and working for that day at that time. So I went ahead and used those hours for other study sessions or for preparing for that linear algebra class. Or even doing homework for that linear algebra class. Okay, now I did add a study session during that same time for that class that usually happens at that time. But this gives me some sense of kind of consistency where pretty much every day of the week from 5 to 8, I'm working on linear algebra. Whether I'm preparing for a class and going to class, or whether I'm working on homework for that class, what have you. Now, what I did do is I tried to pay special attention to Fridays because Fridays are always, that's the end of the week, you're running on fumes and you need to think about adding some you time in. I tried my absolute best to end Fridays at 5 o'clock, which I succeeded at doing. But yeah, so it's an extremely full schedule. And so this is why I worry a lot about students who have to work part-time or even full-time while they are in engineering, because the recommended number of study hours for a usual, like typical course load, remember this student is taking 14 credit hours, so this doesn't even cover students who are taking extra credit hours above the norm. For someone who is taking a usual course load, the expected amount of time that you're spending preparing for, reviewing and studying and doing homework for these classes takes up more than essentially a typical business work week from 8 to 5 every day of the week. It is a lot. And if you want to go and add additional things on top of this, like part-time work, you have noticed that I didn't even add lunch times in here. I don't necessarily think this is a great idea to not go ahead and schedule lunch times. I probably should have done that, but the reason that I didn't is again personal preference, because I personally always work over my lunch. I don't know why. I probably shouldn't. It'd probably be better for my mental and physical health if I didn't do that and I actually got an hour away from the office, but I always work over lunch. So my thought here is that these are valuable hours of the day, and I can be eating while I am studying. So I have my book open while I'm having lunch, or I have my notes open while I'm having lunch. Recognize that I added 8 o'clock to-do items when I didn't have class at 8 o'clock. And the reason that I did that is because engineering is a professional position. You are preparing for a job that will expect you to be at work working from 8 to 5 every day of the business week. Okay, so why would you not be preparing for that expectation now? Okay, so again, this is my personal take on how you should be spending your time. But I completely understand that, there are the odd engineering jobs where you're not expected to be in the office until 9 o'clock. And if you are a person who greatly, greatly appreciates that extra hour in bed in the mornings, okay, maybe you move these study sessions to a different time, which would be less ideal, right? Because you're not preparing for the class right before the class happens. Less ideal, but not a big deal, okay? But you don't delete these study sessions entirely. You just move them somewhere else in the day so that they still happen. You're still getting the number of hours in that you're supposed to, but maybe they're happening at a time that works better for your capacity to be studying at that time of the day, okay? Similarly, some people will not have any classes after 5 p.m. And maybe that's by design. Maybe me, I used to be a night owl, but I'm absolutely not a night owl anymore. I go to bed early, okay, because my brain stops working early these days. And maybe that's you. And so maybe you work extra hard to get your study sessions earlier in the day, and you don't ever have anything after 5 p.m. So all this to say, everything I've done here is based on personal preference, aside from getting the number of hours in that are recommended per credit hour. If I'm going to be completely transparent and honest, I did not follow a strict schedule like this when I was in engineering school. But now that I am out, I wish that I had, mostly because I think I would have gotten better grades. I think I would have gotten better grades, and I think I would have had a much better understanding of the material. And I think I would have had deeper learning, and I think I would have been less stressed, to be honest. I think I would have felt as though I was doing everything possible and that I was being extremely thorough in my work. Whereas when I was actually going through engineering school, I spent a lot of time thinking, am I doing enough? Am I spending the right amount of time? There was just a lot of guesswork in whether I was studying enough or not. And for the most part, I probably was not studying enough. So this is a schedule that I created based on the recommendations. Keep in mind also that there might be classes that just naturally come very easily to you, and maybe you are completely satisfied with your level of learning in that course, even if you don't get the full recommended number of hours of studying in. That is totally fine. You will want to compare that to the rest of your schedule before you start deleting study sessions, though. So instead of completely deleting a study session, I would think very carefully about whether the study sessions that I have scheduled for my other courses are actually resulting in the results that I want from those other courses. So in other words, let's say I find that Mechanical Systems 2 is just an extremely hard course for me. And I find that even if I follow my current plan to the T, even if I'm doing that, but I'm still not getting the grades that I'm wanting, maybe I bomb an exam and I realize something is not right. I am not learning to the depth that I hoped I would be for this class. Well, maybe you take the class that you're, passing with flying colors. You don't need to be spending that amount of time on that class. Maybe you take that study period and you reassign it to Mechanical Systems 2, so that you have just a little bit extra time to spend on that course that for whatever reason is difficult for you. Okay. All right. So this is obviously a gold standard of how you would be studying for this semester. Things happen. These things don't always work out as planned. We get tired, we get, a little bit lazy. Maybe you skip a study session here or there. Not necessarily the end of the world, but what I would recommend is try very hard not to completely throw out this idea that you're trying to stick to this study schedule. So even if you have a bad week and maybe you didn't study at all, you just went to class. You didn't study at all. It was a terrible week. You were completely off your game. Don't throw out the idea that this study schedule is what you're wanting to follow. Don't just give up on studying entirely. Try the next week to get back on track. And that can be extremely hard. It really can be hard to get back on track once you get off track, but try to do it. Try to take a weekend, do some things that help you to get in a good mental space, and then redevote yourself to that plan the following week. Okay. One thing that you might do, I kind of created this study plan without first creating my office hours calendar, which that's the thing I'm going to have you do next. Next, I'm going to create a completely separate calendar that contains only the office hours sessions that are available for every class. What you could have done is created that calendar beforehand and very, very carefully chosen office hours times to be studying for that particular class. So for example, let's say for a fact that thermal fluids, EML 4304, that has office hours Friday 12 to 2. What a good idea would have been is, instead of studying for mechanical systems at that time, is to go ahead and be studying for thermal fluids at that time, with the understanding that, okay, if you're working on homework during this study session and you're not getting it, you have a ton of questions popping up, you're not making progress, you're banging your head against the wall, don't just continue to bang your head against the wall. Instead, get up and go over to the office hours that are available to you at that time. Okay, so it's a little bit more complicated to schedule it that way, but it can be very, very helpful to be devoting your time to studying when you know that other resources like office hours are available at that exact same day or time. Okay, so that said, the very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new calendar. So just like we did last time, I'm going to go to, let's see, I'm going to go up here to add calendar. And I'm going to create a blank calendar, and maybe I'll make it a different color, and I'll call this my spring 2026 office hours availability. Okay, still within my calendars, and I'll hit save. Okay. One thing that's really cool about Outlook is that it will show you multiple calendars simultaneously on the same day. So what you can do is see where the office hours, for instance, overlap with the study sessions that you've already added here. And we'll see that better once I add the office hours calendar. So let me go ahead and hide the meeting and study schedule. And you'll see now that that gives us a blank space to create the office hours. So now let's go back again to this list of information and add in all of the office hours that are available to us. Now, I will say at this current moment, many of these instructors have not listed the TA's office hours. Probably because maybe they want to do a when to meet during the first class session to figure out when is actually a good time for their TAs to have office hours. All this to say, you might not have all of the information that you need to create a complete office hours schedule at this time, but you can always add to it later. But what I will do is I'll go ahead and add what I have. So for instance, I'm going to create a block for EML 3016 Thermal Fluids 2. And I'm going to add Dr. Ali's office hours on Tuesday, Thursdays, 11 to 12. Okay, so let me go ahead and add that as an example, and then I will again pause the video and let you add the rest. So let's do Tuesdays, Thursdays, 11 to 12, 11 to 12, EML 3016. Thermal fluids to heat transfer. Office hours. And I am going to be very specific that these are the instructors. So Dr. Ali, instructor office hours. These happen Tuesday and Thursday of every week until May. And then I am also going to add the location of the office hours. So for instance, you would want to look up maybe what is Dr. Ali's office number so that you know where to go for office hours. Okay, I actually don't have that information. I really should have added that to that first list of like collecting our information. So if you need to go back to your syllabus and look for the instructor's office hours location, I would highly recommend that you do that. The idea is we're just trying to make the most important information that we're going to need to refer back to throughout the semester over and over and over again. We want to make it extremely efficient for us to find that information and to refer back to every time. Okay, so that will be office hours for Thermal Fluids 2. Okay, so go ahead and do this now for all of your classes. And as always, I will stop the video and also do that myself. Okay, so back again, I've added all of the office hours that I currently have available. You'll notice a couple of things. One thing is, actually, sorry, this needs to be corrected to Tuesday, Thursday. You'll notice that some office hours overlap for multiple courses. Okay, so that is a little bit unfortunate, but it's okay. Hopefully you are not needing to be in two places at once, but the thing that's interesting about this schedule is that I think these two classes are actually both taught by the same instructor, and this instructor has just allowed any students from either class to come see them at this same time. So that actually kind of makes it easier and kind of makes sense. You'll notice that this is pretty bare bones in terms of when office hours are available, but I only have instructor office hours here. And more often than not, every TA assigned to the course will also have office hours. I just don't have that schedule available to me right now. So you would want to continue adding TA office hours to this schedule so that you have a complete picture of all of the office hours resources that are available for each class. So the idea is anytime that you are in a study session over here, you're in a study session and you realize you're struggling and you need some help, or you have a critical question that is going to help you to complete your homework or to be better prepared for the next class, you say, okay, I need some office hours. What hours are available to me? You can pull up the office hours calendar instead and look at that. Although what I was saying before is that you can view both of these calendars simultaneously. It gets a little messy because there's obviously going to be some overlap. So one of these office hours is overlapping with a time that you're actually in another class. Which again is a little bit unfortunate because it means that you only really have access to this first 30 minutes of that office hour session before you need to be leaving to be in your other class. But you can, of course, say, okay, let's see, it is currently Thursday at 9:20. I am right here. I feel like I could really use some help with EML 3016. When are office hours next available to me? Oh, okay, today at 11 to 12, I can go do that. And in fact, what's interesting here is we actually did schedule a study session at the same time as an office hours is available, which I've already said is ideal. It means that if at any time during this study session you find that you need extra help, you can pack up your bags, go to the office hours, and make the best use of your time in office hours instead of working alone. And that absolutely, in my mind, counts towards studying. Anytime that you're in office hours, anytime you are applying your brain to material for a class, that counts as studying for that class. Okay. All right. Hopefully this helps and helps you to develop your own resources to make it a really successful semester for you. And one last thing that I will suggest, just as a method of accountability, is I would highly recommend that you print off this schedule every week. You print off this schedule every week, and as you complete a study session or you go to a class, you simply mark it with a check mark to show that in fact you did study from 8 to 9:15 on Monday. And you might even add a little note reflecting about how that study session went. Like, I had my coffee, I was perfectly awake, that I feel like this study session was particularly useful for me. Or maybe later on in the week, you're like, I was dog tired, I couldn't focus, I don't know that I actually got any benefit out of this study session. And the reason that we want to do this is that at the end of every week, you might say, I think my study schedule needs to change because I am not making the best use of my time on Wednesdays at 8 a.m. by trying to force myself to study at this time. So maybe you recognize that because your notes say that it was not a great study session, or you recognize this because you just simply aren't going or doing that study session. So if you go several weeks and there's never a check mark on this box, just realize that that particular study session is not jiving with the way that your brain works. And instead of completely ignoring that study session, you should consider moving that study session to a better time of the day or a better part of the week. Okay. So if Wednesdays at 8 a.m., you're dog tired and you can't focus on studying at this time, maybe you move this session earlier in the week where you're more fresh. You don't necessarily need like Monday afternoons, maybe you're not quite tired yet. And maybe you would rather study hard in the early part of the week when you're fresh, and maybe move some of these later in the week sessions earlier in the week so that you actually get done earlier on Fridays when you are dog tired and you're out of steam and you just can't focus anymore. Okay, so the way that you know to make these adjustments is by keeping track of what's working and what's not working. And it's not necessarily true that because it didn't happen the way that you set out to do this, it's not a failure. It just means that the schedule that you set out needs a little bit of tweaking for it to work better for you. Okay, so I highly encourage you to keep track of what's working, what's not working, and adapt this schedule throughout the semester so that you get in a really good groove of getting in those study hours. So I hope that I have impressed upon you the fact that this is extremely flexible. And the most important thing is getting in the hours, not necessarily when they happen, although there are, like I said, ideal time periods for them to be happening right before and then 24 hours after a class session. But these are guidelines. Do what works for you. As always, I love getting student questions. So if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about in this video, please do email me or let me know. One last thing I want to add is that another reason I use my Outlook calendar instead of using that Coursical course like schedule creator that I showed you before. Like I said, I used to use an app like that. I use my Outlook calendar now because I do so many collaborative meetings. So I need the same meeting to show up at the exact same time and place on my calendar as it does on several other people's. And so I can do that by creating events that I invite attendees to. So I have students, I have faculty collaborators on here, anyone who has an FSU email, I can invite to an event, and they can accept or reject that invitation to the event. And together we can agree on meeting times. And so I am able to do that because my Outlook calendar is specifically linked with the FSU directory. So that is the reason that I use Outlook as my core calendar nowadays, instead of using a third-party app that has no information about FSU emails and the people that I work with. In fact, actually, to add to that, it doesn't even have to be somebody that you work with. Basically any email platform that I know of can send and receive these event invites. So for instance, I have a collaborator at Georgia Tech. If I send him an event invite on my Outlook calendar, it doesn't matter whether Georgia Tech uses Google or Microsoft Outlook, whatever it is they use, he will receive that event invite and he will be able to add that digital event to his own calendar, and accept and reject and suggest revisions to that event as well. So because we live in a digital world where I need to collaborate on deciding on digital calendars, that's why I use these platforms instead of the third party that's not hooked up to an email address or anything. Okay, that's probably more than you ever wanted to know about scheduling for a good semester, but these are my recommendations. So thank you for listening. Hopefully this helped. Bye.